Hey guys, just want to take a second to thank our sponsor, Carnivore Bar. I don't promote many products because honestly, all you need to be healthy is just eat meat, and that's what you should do. But if you're hiking or road tripping or stuck at work and you want something nutritious that is just meat, fat, and possibly salt if you want it, the Carnivore Bar is a great option. I like this product not only because it is pure meat, but also because I really want the carnivore market to thrive as well. The more we support meat only products, the more people will make meat only products, and this will bring this into the mainstream. So if this sounds like something you'd like to check out, then take a look and use my discount code HTC to get 10% off, which also applies to subscriptions, giving you 25% off total. All right. Thanks, guys.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the To Carnivore podcast and YouTube series. We're joined today by Charlie Arnott, who is an eighth generational Australian farmer and an advocate for regenerative farming and wellness practices. Welcome, Charlie.
Simon, lovely to be with you this evening.
Likewise. I will just add that Anthony Chaffee will be joining at some point, but he got held up in an appointment, so he may spring in. But for now, you've just got Charlie and I. So, Charlie, let's sort of start at the start. You were what you'd call a conventional farmer, and in your words, you'd go out and kill things every day with chemicals. What was it that made you change your perception and your way of farming and life?
Simon, it was a series of, I guess, many things. Some were quite short and sharp, and some were a lot more drawn out. I guess there were generally it was the realization that my behaviours as a conventional farmer, which I.e., as you said, running out and killing stuff every day, a lot of resource use or using nature, a lot of I guess behaviours which were I later look back on and see were very destructive generally. Whether it was killing plants, animals, ploughing, ignorant of the importance of soil health and soil to support my business and growing food. So a lot of those behaviours were not congruent with my values, and I didn't actually know what values were. I mean, I knew what values were in broad terms, but I had never really sort of sat down and worked out what my values were as an individual until a certain point when I was doing some training, some workshops with RCS Australia, Resource Consulting Service Australia, and we identified values, and it was pretty clear that my behaviours in pretty much no way at all were aligned with my values. So that was a big one. Visually, and I was seeing paddocks that when were bare, were nude, were unsightly, were not uncommon. That was a pretty common sight, especially in drought. But one particular instance was I saw a paddock very clearly. I can really clearly remember it very vividly. Blowing away. It was a beautiful basalt soil. I had pretty much bared it out with sheep, and it was leaving that paddock and leaving this country probably on the wind to New Zealand. So, that struck me as being a pretty irresponsible thing. And really, it was around that same time I realised that I was pretty much in control of that. People say, it's a drought, and that's just what happens. But there's a lot of, you could argue that certainly a lot of things we were doing were man-made. Like drought was induced with our management. And so there was that. There was some probably mental health, not really, full-on mental health sort of stuff, but it was just like, again, when your behaviour is not congruent with your values, that can be really challenging. And I was, I was really challenged to look at things in a different way. I'm a very curious kind of bloke in the first place, so I kind of was always looking for, even when we were conventional farming, we were doing things differently. We were doing a bit of no-till. We used chemical shearing on sheep. We were quite experimental with a lot of things. So we just sort of...
Chemical shearing, what's that?
Well, you basically inject... We didn't experiment... Well, we weren't doing an experiment with a pharmaceutical. It wasn't that sort of experiment. We were just curious to see how this went compared to normal shearing. So you inject sheep with a chemical. I think you do it once, and then a week later you do it again. and you actually have to put these. So it basically the wool releases from the follicle, and you put this big netting sock over the sheep, and after you do the first injection, anyway, by the time that'll, probably a week or so, 10 days goes by, you basically just peel the sock, the netting off like a sock.
Wow.
And the wool stays on that, and they're bare, and they've had just enough time between the injections to grow a tiny fuzz of wool, So, but God knows what it did to the sheep, and then people went to eat 8-day sheep, So, so back to your question, yeah. Look, it just came a time when I didn't want to do a lot of those things I was doing anymore. So, with a bit of investigation, a bit of pushing and shoving, the odd drought thrown in there, I just decided I'd look at other things. And the thing that really pushed me over the line was a course called, it was a one-day course, very simple, one-day course called Profiting from the Drought. And I saw that in the local paper, thought it was a joke, turned up, had an amazing day. And the facilitator asked me at lunchtime, in a break, we talk about the day, how's it all going, what do you think? And he said, and are you happy? And I said, well, I'm not unhappy, which is a pretty crappy answer. So that was the beginning of my journey, I think, really, was just like, well, what have I got to lose, it wasn't all, clear sailing from then on either. There's lots of ups and downs on the way, and but it was pretty. I didn't need much convincing that I needed to change, and that's what we did.
When I bring up regenerative agriculture or biodynamics or this sort of way of farming, invariably people say to me, "Oh, that's cute. Oh, that'd be great on a hobby farm." But how does that scale up? How do you really feed people with these more natural processes? Did you have any of those doubts? And if you did, how were they kind of, how did you get around them? What inspired you to really give it a crack?
Well, I was pretty sure that we could just convert what we were doing. We still had the same amount of land. We were still going to get the same amount of rainfall. That bit's out of our control. I didn't know. It was a bit of a gamble because I went cold turkey, which I wouldn't sort of, in terms of chemical. So I basically, I did. There was probably one or two sprays in the last couple of crops in that last year that I just didn't do. I just don't want to spray that shit on things, because I knew what was going to happen. That wheat was going to be harvested and then sold to someone, and someone's going to eat it. So kind of when I got my head around all that, I really, I didn't want to be responsible for that. And so it was really an act of faith in some ways. But I also knew that, so we kept all our cattle, we just managed them differently. We kept all our sheep. We ended up selling a lot of our sheep too, just so we can graze our country a bit softer and a bit differently. We've got sheep back on now. So we stopped cropping. So there were some things that we changed, immediately, things we sort of slowly weaned ourselves off. So I wasn't too worried about, from our point of view, being able to still produce, food. We weren't cropping anymore, so we weren't producing wheat and canola and those sort of things. Happy not to, given, as our chemical regime increased every year and our input costs, increased every year. For that. So from our point of view on farm, we still produce a lot of meat, and lamb and mutton. That's our main income from the farm. And in terms of how that fits into the bigger picture, I guess, it's a figure that's thrown around a fair bit, that 70% of the world's food is produced on 5 or less acres of land, plots. And it's a lot of it's, pretty basic farming, but it's feeding a lot of people. Now, the other 30%, that's a lot of industrial farming. And I don't think anyone who says, it can be done, and supports the idea that it can be done much more naturally and to a large extent, I don't think any of those people are just, saying it can be done tomorrow. there's obviously a transition needs to take place, like whether it's an individual farm or a whole industry. But, you know, I'm a firm believer that it will take changes of habits, not just of those producing food, but those buying food. It's going to change. It's going to, you know, take some changes in the whole food system. But just because that might be quite clunky and may take some time, you know, it's not a reason to think it can't be done, because it is being done, you know, and it's just going to take a while. But it's individuals, farmers who are deciding as a business and a family to change their practices, and they don't have to do it immediately. As I said, it's just like weaning yourself off some chemicals, changing your enterprises a bit, working more with nature, having a different attitude. They're all significant changes, and they're all, I reckon, they're all positive. So I think it's just convenient for people to say, it's not possible, because, you know, they've either got vested interests or they just don't have they're just ignorant of what that actually means.
Mm. And for some people, if they haven't seen it happen before, they just assume it can't be done.
That's right. I mean, it is interesting. You think about the amount of, you know, pick the United States because it's just huge, and the amount of cropping land over there that's, you know, corn and sorghum and wheat and God knows what else. You know, what's that going to grow, and how are those people going to survive? Well, you know, I don't know, because I'm not an expert in that. But, you know, if we stopped growing a whole lot of corn to turn to that bloody corn syrup rubbish, and, you know, if we stop, you know, growing corn to turn to ethanol to put into cars, and, you know, so many things that we could just change. I mean, again, easy to say, harder to do, but it's, you know, there's a lot of really sensible approaches, I think, that we can all consider. But yeah, look, it's not going to happen tomorrow. And as I said, you know, farmers can just those small decisions, you know, that they make, looking into alternatives to fertilizers, or working more with nature to manage pests, or it's even at the other end of the spectrum where the eaters are involved, you know, just making different choices and asking better questions and those sort of things that can have huge impact.
When I did your course at your farm in Burua called Intro to Biodynamics, one of the big themes that we spoke about was decentralization of the food system. And, you know, instead of having everything reliant on, you know, the one abattoir and the one giant, you know, monocropping enterprise, couldn't there be more small farms that are producing enough for a family or a community? Which, you know, I was very interested in, and it really does make a lot of sense, because it didn't seem out of the question that you could have a plot of land, you know, land in the country. Land in Australia is expensive, but land in the country you can buy. You know, if you drive 4 hours away from a major city, it's not crazy expensive, and you can run a small operation of, say, cattle. How do you know, and I know you've helped a lot of people get into this game, whether it's lifestyle or for like a business enterprise. How do you kind of recommend people get into having their own plot of land or their own crack at doing this themselves, if you do recommend it?
Yeah, no, I totally recommend it. I mean, I don't recommend a particular size or, you know, or style to that. I think people just, if they're interested, I mean, which is great, that's a great first step. I think if you're in a family situation, you know, what might motivate you is your sense of consciousness around your children's health. I think that's a big
100%.
driver. You know, thankfully in some schools, I don't think all schools, but some schools, there's, you know, Stephanie Alexander kind of kitchen garden things going on. They learn to cook, they learn to grow. They come home, they ask mum and dad why they're not growing their own broccoli. You know, they're fantastic things. So if children can motivate parents and if children can ask better questions of their parents, and that's, you know, call it the guilt factor, I don't know, but that's a great motivator. I mean, people have to be, you know, I guess obviously realistic about what they can grow and where. If they're living in an apartment in Sydney, or, you know, large city, then there's probably only a little bit of balcony space, if that. And if they can't actually grow it themselves, totally get that. Maybe some basil in a pot on the veranda. That's a great start. A bit of rosemary, whatever, you know. They're engaging with nature. They're getting that biome on their fingers. They're kind of there's some connection there. And if that's all they can do, that's fine. But if they want to do more and they can't grow more, they can go to local farmers market, which I know it's an obvious thing, but I mean, just that connection with farmers and taking the kids working out that chickens come out of chickens do, I guess, eventually, but eggs come out of a chicken's ass, like just basic stuff like that, the thing that might be on their plate used to be alive once upon a time. And they're just wonderful, wonderful things. And I guess as people, the verge on your street, I've seen so many wonderful median strips converted into garden, and that, so there's the intention of creating food and converting something, putting some, food on the table, but the other lovely thing is that, g'day Anthony. The other lovely thing is that creates community, because generally those verges are publicly owned, or they're part of some community sort of thing. And I've seen some amazing community gardens in the most strange places in Sydney, for example. That's fantastic. If that's all they can do, that's fantastic too. And then there's getting out to country, like onto farms, going to a biodynamic workshop, go online and scare the crap out of yourself with all the horrible things that'll happen to you if you continue eating processed food. I mean, there is that push and pull. There's there is that fear factor, and that is probably a greater motivator than the pleasure factor of feeling warm and fuzzy about growing your own broccoli. So, and I think again, the motivation of children, like, do I want to be feeding my children processed food and then staring down the barrel of disease, or that old Joel Salatin quote, do you want to pay the farmer now, the doctor later? I mean, those things are that's significant, and people need to hear that, but I mean, and it's all just different scales of it, I guess, Simon, and I think there's almost no excuse. At the end of the day, there's really no excuse. I know a lot of people say it's more expensive, and and it is, per item. I understand that, but what I'd suggest is they also look in their shopping trolley, what other items they've got in their shopping trolley. Like skip all those 8 aisles in the middle of the supermarket and go around the outside. You can't just. I just think it's a bit of a furpy to say, oh, organic food's more expensive in isolation. Like, if you don't buy all the other crap anymore, you'll probably find yourself you'd feed your family very well on a similar budget, and your health's going to be so much better. So come and do a biodynamics workshop. I'd say that, Simon. Anthony, you're most welcome to join us at some point. We might be in WA later in the year, and just so many good publications now. There's plenty of, I don't watch mainstream media or TV really, but there are some interesting shows on there, almost like reality shows, that are kind of put people back on farm and actually realise that that's where the food comes from, and it's just such a wonderful place to be and to live. And again, getting their kids onto a farm, eat some sheep shit, fall over, jump, climb in a tree, pull out a carrot, and they, there's very few kids who just don't love that sort of stuff. And in some ways, some of those kids who don't, would probably still be saved. But I think, that's their nature to, like, they're born. It's like kids aren't born racist. They grow into that because of their environment, their parents. Kids aren't born disliking food or not wanting to go outside. It's when parents say it's raining, it's cold, it's miserable, don't go outside. Then they just go, oh, that's what you don't do. But my God, like my boy, he's 5.5. I mean, he is absolutely the happiest with barefoot with his dog in the garden or in the paddock. And, we've lost him a number of times. Thankfully found him again because of his love of just, he's gone. And God knows what adventures he's up to. But it's just a lovely thing. And, I mean, it's such a big, I know I'm sort of steering off topic there, Simon, but I'm really, it's such a big thing. There's so many threats to that. It's like parents' attitudes, it's societal attitudes, it's cultural, it's, you know, what was the, I read a cover of a book the other day, The Comfort Crisis. The Comfort Crisis. Have you read that? Have you heard of those books?
No,
guys?
I think I've seen the snippet.
But I mean, the name says it all. It's like we're all looking for comfort. You know, we don't want to be bothered to go outside and forage for our own food. You know, so it's a bit of a pandemic, isn't it, of seeking comfort.
I was reminded by something you said there about pay your farmer now or pay your doctor later. There's a similar adage in ancient Egypt that said a quarter of what you eat feeds you, and the other 3/4 feeds your doctor. You know, so even then, thousands of years ago, they understood that the things that you're eating are actually causing disease and harm. And that's something that we haven't lost sight of. You know, we still have these sayings, we still understand this, but we still haven't actually honed in on, okay, what exactly are we supposed to eat and not eat. And now we're eating things that are brand new to the world that didn't even exist in ancient Egypt. And they already knew that the things that we were adding into our diet wasn't very beneficial. So I think that, that's something to keep in mind, that you're right. You know, that a lot of these things are directly from eating the wrong thing.
And some of those things didn't even exist last year. I mean, that's a scary thing, and all under the banner of saving the planet. And you know, it's healthier for you, or that we should take, you know, essentially saying, well, we should, and I just offline talking to Simon there before about, you know, should we be happy to lose some of our freedoms to save the planet, whatever that means, you know, and there's plenty of people who'd be happy to feed us crap in the name of saving the planet and thinking that's probably okay. You know, they would never admit that it's crap, but it definitely is, you know, so yeah. Well, big topics.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's certainly the argument on the other side that people such as like Milton Friedman or Friedrich Hayek or Thomas Sowell would argue that if you give up your freedoms, you will lose the world. You're not saving the world by giving up your freedoms. That's exactly how you lose it. That's exactly how you go into destruction and despair. You know, we saw this in different, you know, the USSR and in China. I mean, even their economic system was less efficient and less productive, and it hurt people and it slaved them and it killed them by the millions. And it all started with that same noble concept of, hey, we need to give up some of our freedoms for the greater good. It's all about the greater good. And unfortunately, that doesn't work. You know, you can't give up basic necessities and human rights for the greater good. I mean, this is something that Hitler was talking about. You know, for the greater good, all these things we're doing. He may have actually thought that he was doing the world a favor with all the things that he did. And there's certainly, more of that. You know, there are people talking about getting rid of the Nuremberg Code because it's so restrictive, and we need to help people. So we need to get rid of the Nuremberg Code so we can help all these people. It's like, no, the Nuremberg was put in place to keep well-meaning people like yourself the hell away from people, because it doesn't go very well when you strip away people's freedoms and commit human rights violations in the name of their own safety and prosperity.
But it's interesting that you know, that we're still challenged with that. You know, that's obviously been the big one that sort of really everyone's alarm. Well, not everyone, unfortunately, not everyone's, but a lot of people's alarms went off. Mm-hmm. But we're still challenged that way, aren't we? You know, it's not in the banner of, well, I guess some of these things are in the banner of socialism, but you know, as you say, under the banner of saving the health of the elderly or the children or the population, or in that case, and you know, we sucked it up. We you know, we didn't have any other reference point for it, I guess. We were just so used to our freedoms and we were so trusting. And before you knew it, it was like, you know, rubber bullets against citizens at the, you know, Melbourne War Memorial. It was like, how ironic is that, you know? But anyway, that's probably for another podcast.
Yeah.
No, we can go there.
Yeah, cool.
And then we were all cancelled.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, but I mean, it all goes part and parcel. You either have this sort of collectivist sort of ideology that, that there are certain people that have never met you, that have no idea about the inner workings of your life on a day-to-day basis, but because they're so smart and they're so gifted that they can understand how to make one rule that will fit for you and everyone else in every different situation. And I just don't think that works out when you actually try it out in practice. It sounds nice, if you could do it, but in reality, things are much too complicated and they're much too individual. Every individual has so much that they have going on that is completely unique to them and no one else. And you can't make a one size fit all rule for that. And so allowing people to just live their life and make their own decisions. No one's going to make a better decision for their own life than they will. There are exceptions to that rule. Of course, there are people that just don't care what happens to their life and they're just going to be very reckless. But by and large, people, no one's going to spend your money more carefully than you will. And so if you have someone else spending your money, someone else doing things and making decisions, they may have all the best intentions in the world, but that may not be, what's best for you. And especially when you're talking about billions of people, you cannot possibly make all those decisions. And when you separate that out and you go back to the individual household living on a farm, that is purely independent, makes their own food, makes their own, maybe even makes their own clothes, but is completely self-contained and sufficient. They are able to build a more structured, habitable world because you have individuals that are very self-sufficient. They don't need all these programs and handouts and things like that because they're self-contained. And you have the more independent, self-contained people that are out there. You don't need as many rules and safety nets and things like that because people are already taken care of, and that just builds that small community around those individuals, and that gives larger communities and larger communities. But it's communities of individuals. And that's the thing that people forget. I think I saw Larry King once talking to Penn. Penn and Teller was a magician. He's a famous guy in America, plays in Vegas and things. And he's outwardly a libertarian. Penn is, and he was talking to Larry King about that and saying, well, look, I think that the people in America, they're able to live their own life. They're able to make decisions for their own life and choose the direction that they want to go in and the day-to-day decisions that they want to make. And Larry King just sort of cut him off and said, look, we live in a nation of 300 million people. Someone needs to think for the masses, forgetting that the masses isn't some sort of crazy beast, that the masses are him and Penn and me and you. That's who the masses are. But of course, people never think that they are part of the masses. They think that obviously I can live my own life. Obviously I have control over everything, but all these idiots over here, like, well, someone's got to be done about them, but they are the masses and they're going to be sucked into this whole thing, just like all the rest of us. And that's what they don't realize.
It's interesting because I saw, which one's the tall guy of those two?
That would be Penn, the taller guy, Penn Jillette.
Yeah, he was. I mean, I've seen talking about some things, and this is going back a few years, I think, before he was very, very. I guess it's slightly different context because different reasons, but in my mind, it's all pretty much the same sort of thing. He's very pro. He was very anyone who didn't know their children is a criminal, basically. I remember seeing a very, very, and it was very quite graphic in terms of had all these demonstrations and whatever else. They're very visual. But man, having watched that, I just thought he must think everyone who doesn't believe in what he does is an absolute idiot. Like that was just the way. It's like, you don't do this, you're an absolute twat. But anyway, I digress. Yeah, but I mean, someone like Larry King, I mean, he's a prominent, commentator. You got to think, are they put up to that sort of stuff? Is that, are they driving that sort of stuff for a reason? Is he just ignorant? Is he just doing it for the listens and the pushback? I don't know. I mean, it's interesting that how, especially in what happened in those last couple of years, seemingly very intelligent people, and often in positions of power and influence, just had very fascinating their view on all of that. And look, again, that's the way it is. That's the world is made up of different people, and thank God it is. So, but anyway, do you think if they tried on again, we're going to all be not all? Do you think that it's going to be as much of a pushover?
I would hope not. I mean, it's it's one of those things that, like you said, we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know what to expect. So people were just trying to make decisions as best they could at the time. Now maybe people were maybe using that to their advantage. I'm sure that happened in some cases, but I'm sure there was other ones that were just earnestly trying to do the right thing and try to deal with a difficult situation. But it was all ad hoc. I mean, it was just completely random. Every country did different things. But then I think the problem came, trying different things and trying your best, fine. But the problem I had was when data started coming back after a year or so on the different countries that had different methods, and there were clearly different results, and some were better and some were worse, that people didn't then adjust and go, okay, well, that didn't work. Well, let's do what this other place did. And that was a problem. Even just in America, every state did something different. Every city had a different ordinance, and so you had a lot of data, you had a lot of experiments, a lot of people doing a lot of different things, and you could see very different results. And of course, you would look at something and then you say, oh, well, this proves my point, and then of course it gets unproven by something else that you ignore and all that sort of stuff. But so it's very difficult. But I think that a lot of people, especially in this space, who have seen that we've been misled about about food safety and about the food pyramid and all these different sorts of things, about sugar being at least not dangerous, and at least not a problem. It could be just an empty calorie. That was what it was said. And that other things are driving these diseases, like meat, which we've been eating for millions of years and not had the issues with heart disease that we have now. That people have seen that and seen this sort of the wool taken off their eyes to that, and they think, okay, what else are they lying about? And so I think that more and more people are coming to that conclusion that they can't just take the word of their government, just based on solely their word, and which is good. That's very healthy. If you you get too trusting, and you can get set up quite quickly. And that's, I mean, Germany before the 1930s was one of the most, this is something that people have looked at this. They're actually one of the more tolerant countries. It was one of the most advanced civilizations that had ever existed at that point. They were one of the most racially tolerant, and actually most tolerant of the Jewish people up until that point. And the Jewish people, when Hitler tried to sort of push something and say something, well, the Jews did this, and they're like, hold on a second. He got a lot of pushback, and he had to sort of hide it. A lot of the things that he did with the Holocaust was quite, had to go through a lot of subterfuge. He had the people that were, the prison guards. They were under penalty of death to talk about anything that they saw at those camps when they went home. So it wasn't something that was just all the Germans were just these horrible anti-Semitic racist people that just wanted people to go down, like Hitler was, and his inner circle was, certainly. But that wasn't necessarily the German people. And so if they can be slowly worked and slowly turned into what what happened in 1930s and 40s in Germany, anyone can. I mean, anyone's vulnerable to this, and everyone has to be very vigilant that they're not getting slow walked, down this road again, the primrose path to perdition. And it's every the road to hell is paved with good intentions, as they say. And that was Nazi Germany. It was just like, hey, this is a problem. We need to do this. This is going to help this. This is going to help these people. This is going to help those people. And it was an amazing marketing campaign and propaganda campaign. But it was all a logical step from here to there, and every little step led to something worse. So hopefully people are wising up to that now. We've already had so many, George Orwell, Friedrich Hayek writing the Road to Serfdom, and Alexander Solzhenitsyn just demonstrating clearly how terrible and terrifying these regimes were, and how insidious the advance into them were. Hopefully people are starting to say, like, okay, well, maybe we need to be a bit more careful now again.
I guess it takes effort, doesn't it, to push back? A bit like that reference to the comfort crisis. It's like, I can just sort of suck this up and be comfortable and not, offend anyone or have to kind of make an effort to justify anything. It's just it's going to be an interesting reference point for the future, and I'm watching and waiting for the next thing. But as you say, Anthony, farms or people who can grow food, who can make their own clothes, who can, we don't have to go back to the dark ages and live in caves or anything, but just those who can be much more self-sustainable and create those communities of like-mindeds. And that's something that I found in that whole show was how our social dynamics changed a lot. We found different tribes. There were people that we kind of, not even consciously, we just sort of had nothing in common anymore, moved away from, and others that you just went, my God, I never have thought. And it was such a lovely thing. And it was, probably one of the good things that came out of it was that a realignment, almost like a different filter system, one that would probably not have been game to put in place before, and actually, everyone's prejudices or opinions were out in the open. It was like, great, this is a great opportunity to kind of cut to the chase. Who do I want to hang with? Who do I want to talk to? Who do I want to, hang out with? And what do they say? The 5 people, you become the 5 people you hang out with the most. There's so many people I didn't want to hang out with anymore because and it wasn't like, oh, you don't believe in what I'm believing. That's not at all. It was more actually, I can see where this is going, and I don't know they're conversations I can have, and they're not things that I can share with people. So I want to share those things and have community with people who I can relate to. And it was a social experiment of sorts, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's quite bizarre.
It was definitely an inflection point. Like it was uncomfortable, but it really it was an eye opener. That's for sure. Charlie, talking about food security, I know through your community, I've been able to find farmers who will sell meat basically direct to the customer. And when I was running Mackenzie's Meats, people would email me all the time and say, hey, I want to buy half a cow, a whole cow. How do I do it? And I found people through your community who were willing to do it, and they deliver it frozen. And it's been a pretty amazing service. What do you think about that as a sort of potential future of food production and food delivery, that sort of befriend a farmer and purchase direct from someone you trust?
I think it's the future. Whether it's meat or any food at all, I think there's so many benefits. Is hopefully financial. It depends on if anyone's getting ripped off and paying a fair price. But if we can cut out those middlemen, that's got to be a positive thing. Anyone who could be bothered to deliver meat, or is even thinking about supplying it direct, no one is doing that who is growing shit food, right? Everyone is doing that. You can guarantee they want that good food that they've put their heart and soul into onto your plate, so that it becomes an automatic filter for who's doing the right thing, or not the right thing, but who's doing good things. So that's positive. And it's not just one way. Food goes one way. Yes, money goes the other. But there's also those conversations that happen. I think I posted something on Instagram today in my bloody stories there somewhere, and it was a quote from was it Pluto or someone? What's his name? That bloke?
Plato.
Plato. Plato. Those who tell stories rule society, and it's so true. It's the engagement between the person who's growing the food, the person eating the food, and those stories of how they grew it. And then there's the stories of the joy that the families had eating that meat or that beef or whatever, that food. That builds communities. And, there's not one society in the world that hasn't been, or community that hasn't been built, on food and the production of that food and the sharing of that food and the reverence for that food and the ritual of eating food. So, who can get excited about going to the supermarket and buying a bloody steak wrapped in plastic, generic? Who's going to talk about that at the table? But if it's bought from even a butcher shop, and that butcher's able to tell you where it's from, or you bought it direct from the farm, there's a lovely story. If you're lucky enough, you've gone to the farm to actually get it yourself. And a lot of those a few of those direct to farmer food systems and direct to eater food systems. You know, the people eating it, the people who've paid the money and got the beef, they've probably even laid eyes on the animal that was alive. And I think that's fantastic, and that's great for kids. And that thing over there is alive and fluffy and cute. It actually ends up on your plate, and that's gonna feed our family. That's going to give us joy, and it's going to bring community together. I mean, they're the lessons that got to be learned, I think, in schools, and that's a food system that teaches those lessons. Again, going to the supermarket and throwing packets of stuff in a trolley. What are kids learning from that? Absolutely nothing. If they're learning anything, it's that whole convenience thing. I can just go to the shop and buy something and eat it, and for them it's like fuel, isn't it? It's like, I just need to fuel my body. It's like, they need to know where it's from. They need to know how it works in their body, and they need to understand the effort that's been put into it, and actually value that food, not in dollar terms, because kids don't care if it's $5 or $10 or whatever. They just need for them to understand the value to them, for their health and the joy it brings them and their parents and their friends. I think it's so important. So 100%, Simon. There's so many, there's an exhaustive list of benefits from doing that. And I guess they're just a few, but I'm just such a big fan of it. And for those and many other reasons. And that's why we do it. We're selling our meat through Integrity Meats at Goulburn at the moment. A couple of guys, Luke and Stu, they sort of started up and got that cranked up and doing such a wonderful job, and providing good, nutritious meat into homes and to restaurants in Sydney. And I love supporting that. I mean, it's Goulburn is not Double Bay, right? It's a not down and out. I wouldn't say that, but it's not a very exciting country town. But who gives a shit? It's got a fantastic butcher shop in there, and there are good people there who obviously want that meat. So, big fan of that. I get carried away about it because I kind of go to Sydney. I go to the cities, and I kind of see the food that kids eat, and it's bloody terrible, and there's not many, it's not that bloody hard. I know it's easy for me to sit here and say it, and I've got a freezer full of my own meat, but it's just, if parents can just get off their ass and care about their kids' health, then the game changes.
Yeah. Is it possible to actually go directly to a farmer? I thought there had to be some sort of intermediary that I have it go through an abattoir first or something like that between you and the farmer. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, yes, you can do it. There's two ways. You can do it the right way, or one way is if that farmer has had that animal slaughtered and processed in a licensed facility like an abattoir, and then it goes through a licensed butcher to get broken down, and then it's you pay for kilos of whatever that is. That's all above board, and everything can be traced back, and it's all done in a proper kind of a context and facilities. The other way that can be done is where the issue is a transaction of money. Okay, so it's like you're paying for that. That's got to tick all these boxes. Now you may be a farmer who does a home kill, and you have a relationship with people, a family in Sydney, where in theory money doesn't change hands. Maybe if you've bought the animal before it actually goes to the processor, and the person who ends up eating it and paying for it actually owned it when it got processed, that's fine too. It's just when a farmer owns it and he's selling it to someone else that hasn't been processed properly, that's where the problem is. So, I hazard to say there's ways around it, and I guess people have to be sensible about, where they're getting the meat from and so on. But it's all about having trust and relationship building with farmers direct. And I mean, you can even get butchers to come on farm. Like we have our own butcher. Love to have our own butcher. We have a fellow who used to be he's still a butcher. I guess he just doesn't have a shop, and he does kills for us at a pretty handy facility down the road on a farm. It's not licensed, but it's got all the stuff, and there's no we don't sell that meat to customers. That goes in our freezer, and that's great. But we share that with people. They come here, friends come here for dinner. They get it on their plate at the dining table, or they take an esky home of meat. And that, I mean, it's such a lovely gift to give. Have to say, it's beautiful. So yeah, two main ways, and there's the legal kind of above board way, and then there's the
roundabout.
The roundabout.
The other ways.
Charlie way. No.
That's it. I don't recommend people do the other way.
Disclaimer.
That's right. But I've heard it can be. I've heard people do it.
Yeah, I mean that's what I did in America, because you could go directly to a rancher and get something, and they would you could go through a butcher and a butcher would source it, or you could go directly to a rancher and then they would source the butcher actually. And so I found that was much better. I mean literally it was half the price of just going to a butcher and having them source it. I did the legwork myself. I got the cow that I wanted. And I went for an older cow, which I had heard was much more flavorful meat. So I was like, want to try that. And so I got a 10-year-old cow, best meat I've ever had in my life. It was like every day of its life, it ate grass, and it was 10 years old. It was absolutely, hands down, the best meat I've ever had. I felt supercharged.
Have you done that, Charlie, with the older cow?
Yeah, we not 10 years old. I'm not saying we wouldn't, but I just haven't. We've done probably 4 or 5 year old cows, and absolutely, and again, as long as the sort of the process is done quickly and without any grief and so on, then in a paddock kind of situation, absolutely, that's and that's at the end of the day, that's the best place to do it. They hardly, I don't know, one minute they're eating grass, the next they're not, and reducing that amount of stress. That's a really important thing. I'm sure you guys know more than I do about the science behind that and the physiological kind of changes that take place with stress and so on. But if you can avoid that and have it all happen where it lives, I mean, that's, as again, to quote Joel Sultan, has only one bad day in its life, its last day. Every other day is wonderful. So. But yeah, that's interesting. I'm glad to hear that, Anthony. So I would have had nice, beautiful yellow fat.
Yeah.
And tasty. Yeah. Hopefully a fat 10-year-old cow, not too skinny.
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't get to them in time, and stress don't trim off any fat. I want it all. So it was sort of trimmed as you would find in a grocery store, which is too much. And but yeah, deep yellow fat, absolutely beautiful. Not really any marbling to speak of, but the flavor was amazing. The fat was amazing, and I actually ate less. I ate less of it. I felt better, and I really felt energized when I ate this stuff. I'm assuming it had a much better nutrient density profile. And but just the flavor, it's just more beefiness. I I did a taste comparison. I had a New York strip. There was like a prime cut, so the fattiest cut you can get besides Wagyu in America, and then just this cow. So I had the same cut from each one. I started with the prime cut, big thick steak, and it was just amazing. I was like, God, I love just eating meat. This is amazing. Just love steak. And had a bite of that, then switch over to the other one. Again, it was absolutely amazing. Just loved that. Had another bite, had another bite. And I was like, all right, I should try the other one again. Couldn't taste it. Could not taste the beef flavor. It only tasted rich because it had more fat, but I could not taste any beef flavor. It was completely overwhelmed by the strong beef flavor. It wasn't like a bad, like, oh my God, like gamey, nothing like that. It was just the beef flavor was much more pronounced, and I thought it was fantastic. And so it absolutely completely dwarfed the flavor of the normal store-bought meat.
Was the store-bought meat, would have been grain finished, would it?
Yes, yeah. So and it was prime grade, so it was very fatty. So it was a lot of marbling.
Yeah. But that marbling, or I guess the flavors in that fat are going to be governed by the feedlot that it finished in generally, because that's where it's going to put on most of that fat, isn't it? And what's in that ration? A handful of different plants essentially, and nowhere near the lifetime of diversity that cow had probably been, grazing on, I don't know where, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 different species contributing to the taste and the complexity of that fat. I mean, I'm really not surprised. I'm not surprised at all. Just another point, just on doing home kills, and I think it's a lovely thing when you can do it. You can do a home kill. Is the reverence that you can have, or I won't say should have, but one can have for that whole process. That whole acknowledging its life here, that it's had a lovely life and it's contributed to the functionality of that landscape in its small way, and it ending its life there where it grew, where it lived, and having a very personal, dare I say, relationship, or end of that relationship. It's a huge responsibility, and much nicer way to go, I think, than on a truck and into an abattoir and it's just another animal. So that's I guess another nice thing about doing home kills is you have that opportunity to express gratitude to the animal and what it's now providing in the form of nutrition and communion, around the table, and opportunity for community and people to come together. And it's a lovely thing to acknowledge that.
Yeah, it's something we've certainly lost when people moved into the cities, and predominantly in cities now, and no one has any idea where their food comes from, and that's, I think, why this new generation of people are so entranced by the vegan vegetarian sort of movement, because it does sound horrific to kill an animal, and they have these videos of like, oh, if you had to kill it yourself, you would never do that. You'd want to pet it and play with it and love it, and you would never do that. Well, that's what people did every single day of their existence, going back throughout to the dawn of man, and then some. And it's just we've forgotten that, and we've separated people too much from reality, and so they're not living in reality anymore. And they think that not only can you get away without something suffering and dying for us to live, but that we would actually benefit, that our health would benefit, the health of the world would benefit. And these things are just not incompatible. They're just incompatible with reality is the fact of it. There's no such thing as bloodless meal. Something has to die for us to live. And whether that's crops, your animals are going to die to grow those crops. I think there was a figure I saw yesterday, 6.7 billion animals die every year in America to grow crops. And that's not bugs, that's sentient animals,
they don't count. Those bugs don't count.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
There's a great book that you may have read on eating meat by Matt Evans, and in it, one of the most poignant things that he says is in not in defence, because I don't know we have to defend ourselves, but I guess in the putting forward the points of diet in our meat in our diets, that and those who don't like meat in their diets or anyone else's diets, their argument. He said in Victoria, the rice growing industry, destroys 30,000 ducks a year, just so that people can have their rice, their vegan rice, as an example. A pretty hardcore one, because it's not bugs and things in this case. It's actually, birds, a little bigger and fluffier and cuter. And that he makes this great point that the most significant impact we can, if this whole thing is about suffering, right? If this is about reducing the amount of suffering, well, to your point, Anthony, about the billions of life forms that are annihilated for X amount of food and hectares and whatever else, but if it's about suffering, then one of the most significant things that we, at least in Australia, because that's what he was quoting, and the figures stand, one of the most significant things we can do in this country to reduce suffering is get rid of feral cats. More hundreds of thousands of animals, native animals, and probably a few domestic ones, not just killed but tortured every night, and that's a lot of suffering. And if everyone's fair income about reducing suffering, then they could probably turn their attention, instead of running around and going to farms and releasing chickens, to fly freely into the world, and so they don't have to suffer at the hands of horrible egg farmers in their free range things and then get eaten by a whole lot of foxes. They would be better off putting their efforts into removing, feral cats out of anywhere they can. That would have a much more significant impact on reducing suffering. And the interesting thing, I don't know, I'd love to have this conversation with someone one day, is to have that, that conversation around the cats, see if they actually own a cat, because if they do they, does it stay inside the whole time? Is it contributing to suffering, going outside and eating willy wagtails? If it's not, then it's obviously stuck inside, and that's probably not very good for it anyway. It's a bit cruel. And then find out what the cat's actually eating. If it's eating biscuit and nuts, well, that's cruel because it's a cereal and that's killing it. If it's eating meat, well, they're bloody hypocrites. So anyone who's on that anyone on that bandwagon, then they shouldn't be any cat, dog, I guess any other meat eating animals like that, they shouldn't really have, So I don't know. I get pretty pissed off about that sort of stuff, to be honest, because it's can you tell? But anyway, back to Matt Evans. It's such a good book, and he's really, I love the way he's really diplomatic about it. He's not like that, down with all vegans. He's just really, he systematically just looks at all the issues, and he's very, very methodical. He's a lovely bloke.
All right, we'll put a link in here on eating meat. Sounds like a good one.
Charlie, it's a cracker.
We introduced the cane toads to kill the cane beetle. Have you got some sort of disastrous animal that we can introduce that'll kill all the feral cats?
Tigers or something like that.
The badgers of
Hey, did you say hyenas?
Yeah, hyenas, just packs of wolves.
The Australian hyena. Yeah.
I don't know, but I don't know. There's not for me to decide. Yeah. But having said that, I've actually got a few cats. We have two cats here actually. So
do they have bells on their necks or something?
Look, they don't, and I dare say they contribute to the destruction of a bit of wildlife here. But look, like everything in life, it's a bit of an offset, isn't it? You think, not an offset, it's probably the wrong word. Actually, I don't like the word offset because it's like carbon. That's a whole other conversation. But
can of worms.
Yeah, total can of worms. But as you said, there's life, there's death, there's compromise, there's in anything. And look, the joy it gives us and the kids, and I think, dare I say, a few birds might get eaten. But on the other side, I think that what we do, we don't do that on purpose by any means. We don't relish the fact that some wildlife probably does get destroyed. But we are quite comfortable with the fact that we're probably doing a whole lot of other things that are contributing very positive to wildlife. So it's not like justifying it. It's just going, you know what, in the balance of things, I think that's okay. They're not living. I mean, we feed them. So as long as they're relying on the wildlife to survive. But those feral ones are a real problem.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I have the same conversation with vegans sometimes when they say, that we shouldn't be eating animals, we shouldn't be doing this, we shouldn't be killing animals just so that we can live. And so I ask them the same thing, sort of in a different way. It's like, okay, so do we get rid of all predators then? All the wolves, all the foxes, all the lions, all the dolphins and fish and birds of prey and all these sorts of things. And they always say, oh, no. I mean, that's just nature. It's like, right. We're nature too. I mean, this is just the natural world that we live in. And this is just, we're not outside of reality. We're not outside of this planet. We're not gods. We didn't just come here from the ethos, from the ether and just appeared here. We are animals. We're of this world, and these rules still apply to us, and we are part of it. Just because we live in houses doesn't make us all that special, not biologically anyway, and not to the realities of the world. But it was funny, you were talking about like releasing things to, get rid of the cane beetle and the cats and things like that. I had a theory years ago when I was seeing so many people come into the emergency department, and they would literally pack bags. They would have luggage And they would come in and they're like, yeah, well, I'm just kind of feeling sick, so I guess I have to come to the hospital for a while. And it's like they literally had a cold. And they were just like, oh, I just like it just shuts down. And they had luggage. It was like, look, if you're well enough to pack 2 full suitcases, you won't have to be sick at home. And some of these people were just like, no, I have to come in. And I don't know, they just wanted a vacation from their life or something like that. And I kept like wondering, like how are these people? I mean, this person's 60 years old. Like, how did you make it to 60 years old, and be and not be able to cope with your own life so well? Like, how have you not been eaten by wolves by now? And then I realized we don't have wolves. So what we need to do is start releasing wolves into cities. And imagine like the problems that would just go away. Like, first of all, like fitness, people just sprinting to their car from the the restaurants and things like that. And like if you had to deal with wolves, like like all these little things that are just coming up, I was just like, oh well, there's this problem, like the problem of the day, like none of that would even make your radar. It was like there are wolves outside.
Better get in the gym.
Yeah, that's it. Perspective. I better learn and teach my kids how to use a spear, a trap.
Yeah.
Because I'm gonna have to catch some of these animals that they're hunting as well. Classic. I love that. I love that idea. That's a great lesson in perspective, isn't it? It's like maybe being 5 minutes late to something, or not getting that like on Instagram, maybe that doesn't mean quite so much to me anymore. So bring on the wolves. So what would they have been here? That'd have been, I think, the megafauna. There might have been some carnivorous megafauna in Australia. Let's do some work, and I hear they're trying to recreate mammoths in Russia somewhere. So maybe we could get some megafauna back out, or bunyips. Get a few bunyips. Do you get bunyips over there in Western Australia?
No, I don't think I know what that is. Oh, quokkas. Yeah.
No, bunyips.
How great would that be to get mammoths out in Siberia? I mean, that's like a huge tracts of land that just like no one's doing anything with, and you just all of a sudden you just have herds of mammoth running around. That would be great.
Bring it on. I mean, look, you go down a few rabbit holes there. They reckon there were mammoths there not that long ago. Like I'm talking, 100 years ago.
Oh,
so wow. Yeah, I mean, we're not talking tens of thousands of years. Yeah. There's whether they're being doctored up or not, but there's people suggesting there's photographic evidence of mammoths. So so they maybe weren't. But what a great idea! It's like releasing the wolves back in the Yellowstone, maybe putting the mammoths back into the tundra. Not such a silly idea, So, but I love the wolves thing. Actually, that's awesome. Survival of the fittest.
Yeah,
would be the least of way. It's like, I'm just going to go down the road to get a. It's like, no, you're not, because you're a wolf. Yeah. No, don't do it.
Yeah. Well, I was when I was in Bangladesh, I was doing humanitarian work there in the refugee camps, and I was talking to some of the people there who was the guy there who's running the facility, and the charity that I worked with. And he was a commander in the Bangladeshi army. This place was a very difficult place to live and to survive in. And, there's an actual genocide in Burma. 200,000 people were killed in a month. 1 million people fled into southern Bangladesh. And they had 1 million people stuffed in actual shanty, like just tarps. They had tents made out of tarps. A million people living in tarps. And so we're dealing with all that and trying to help these people. And that was when everyone was talking about, this is when like microaggressions first came to the scene. And, what microaggression being, well, it's not, it's nothing that's insulting. It's never been considered insulting. They didn't mean it to be insulting, but I was insulted and that's your fault, And so that's what a microaggression was. And I was trying to explain that to this commander of the Bangladeshi army. And he was just laughing. He was just like, that can't be real. What are you guys talking about?
That's a movie.
Yeah. He was like, no, what? No, that's not real. No, people don't think that, because, when you have your day-to-day has a very real threat of macroaggressions. Microaggressions just don't make the radar. And so, people having the time to worry about some of these things is an indication that their lives are truly blessed, that they have no real issues to worry about. So they have to find issues to worry about, which is just in our nature to be like, there's something I need to fix, and that's fine. That's a noble sentiment, but, prioritize, go out into the third world countries, go out, work in a refugee camp, see what real problems look like, and then come back and try to fix things.
challenge yourself, gets back that comfort crisis. It's just too comfortable. So they're looking for, like, well, not that they're looking for something to get uncomfortable about, but I guess it could be boredom. I often refer to my grandfather, my mother's father, who he signed up. From what I understand, he signed up for the First World War when he was 15, turned 16 on the boat over to the Middle East. Took his horse, took his saddle, took his bridle, his swag and whatever, with all his buddies. Well, not his buddies, a few his brothers went as well, but he was 16. 16, he went to another country, and with his horse, he could ride like a demon, and fought over there and came home. And that was a normal upbringing back then. And then the Second World War came along. He wanted to sign up again. They wouldn't let him because he was too old. But what an amazing man, but also a generation where that was okay. And there's that really good yarn about the boy who, just very quickly, his father was injured in the First World War, came back, had been continually, had sort of ongoing injury, was in hospital, and the father said, if you can go out, and his son was like 15 or 14 or something ridiculous, 13 maybe. He said, if you can plough that paddock of mine, 20 acres, whatever it was, back and then horse-drawn plough. Have you heard this story?
No.
No. Yeah. If you can plough my paddock, true story, not a word of lie. If you can plough my paddock, I grant you whatever wish you want, because he was in Aussie and he couldn't do it. And the boy went out, got the horse, and ploughed up his paddock for his dad. Went back. He said, "Dad, I've done the job." And he said, "Oh my God, my boy, you're amazing. You can. What do you want to do?" And he goes, "I want to ride to Sydney." This is in the Gippsland, right, in Victoria. "I want to ride to Sydney on my horse for the opening of the Harbour Bridge." And that boy, by himself, got on his horse at age, I'd have to find, it was 12, 13, 14. It was ridiculous. And rode all the way to Sydney from Gippsland in Victoria. Saw the opening of the Harbour Bridge, created a bit of a thing by that time, I think, and then rode all the way home again. Stopped at hotels and creeks and wherever he could throw his swag down. I mean, the guy was like, again, 12, 13, whatever, and that was probably not unusual, to be honest. That was probably not unusual. So yeah,
definitely gotten soft.
Bloody hell, we're getting soft, but it's really interesting. Those who can. I mean, it's a bit like that cold therapy in a very small sort of little, box. It's like, you don't have to do that. No one has to jump in a freezing cold bath, but they choose to because they know they're going to get some benefit, and they're happy to put up with short-term pain because they know that they're going to live longer, they're going to be happier, all that cool stuff that happens. It's just a very small example of, when you got balls to do it and you understand the benefit of doing it. The immediate benefits are long term. It's like you're mad not to, So, so cold bath therapies or riding a horse to Sydney Harbour Bridge. I'm not sure what's worse, actually.
Yeah, those are. I love those stories. I have my great grandfather on my mother's side actually had a similar story. He was the youngest son of a wealthy family in England, and he just sort of looked at this and he said, "Well, I'm the younger son. I'm not going to inherit anything. I could just live off the family money, like a lot of other the gentry at the time did." But he looked at those people and they were just like, these guys are wastrels. They're losers. They're just hanging out, drinking all the time. They're nothing. Like, I don't want that life. I'm going to go make my own way. I'm going to be my own man. So at 14 years old, he jumped on a boat in 1850, jumped on a boat from England and went down to Brazil and started mining emeralds and made a fortune mining emeralds at 14 years old. And then he traveled up through America. I have a picture of him, my grandmother has a picture of him, and that's with the family of him in this. He's already just a made man, and he's in this white, like Mark Twain suit in 1856. He's looking there, and he's 16 years old in New Orleans on way to San Francisco and then Australia. And he came down to Australia, made another fortune mining opals, and then went up and mined gold up in Alaska. And so he had three self-made fortunes, and then went over and got into like stock exchange sort of things. I think he was involved in commodities exchange and things like that after that. It was just a landed gentleman after that. And but yeah, 14 years old, just said, you know what, I'm going to make my own way. And people did that. I mean, now you wouldn't even allow your child to go on an airplane at 12 or 13 or something like that, let alone ride a horse hundreds of miles, thousands of miles or so, through, bushland and rangeland, and live off the land, and just go to, see a bridge and then come back. I mean, Jesus, like most kids aren't allowed to go to the bus stop by themselves at that age, and anymore. So, but we've infantilized, the entire world at this point. When you look at how the rest of the world lived forever, people grew up a lot faster than they do now. And some of the people in their 30s can't do that sort of thing.
100%.
It's a bit sad. Is it? One of my favourite quotes is, "Our job as parents is to prepare our children to leave us." And I remind myself of that every day in just pushing the kids into situations. What does Jordan Peterson say? Dangerous play safely. Let them play. Dangerous kind of things, but in a safe way. Yes, it could be disastrous. It could, not be hopefully fatal. But they've got to learn those boundaries. They've got to have the scratches. They've got to fall out of the tree, and that's, I guess, where it learns. And that kid, and he learned to ride a horse when he was probably 4, and he learned to plough that thing with his dad. There's such a beautiful. Sam Neill read it out a couple of years ago. I'll have to find the poem about a ploughman. It just reminded me how the boy would tag along after his father. His father's got the plough and the horse, and his boy would run after him, because he's dad and he's a hero and he wants to know how to do it, and his dad shows him. And then as the time goes by, then the boy takes hold of the plough as he grows, and his dad's watching him. And then, as time goes by, the son has turned to a man, and his father's the one who can't quite keep up with him when he's ploughing because he's old. And it's this gives me goosebumps. It's such a lovely, lovely poem. Just reminding me about the ploughing, but that's what it is. It's like, that beautiful relationship, and fathers teaching sons and mothers teaching daughters, and how to do basic stuff, knitting, sewing, bushcraft. My daughter's 12 and she's out there cracking a stop it like a maniac the other day. I only showed her a couple of times, and then she's like cracking it left-handed, going, "Look at me, Dad." I mean, okay, that might be quite handy when the wolves come along, Anthony. Maybe that's the thing. So, I mean, that's not going to save a life potentially, but it's those things. It's like, that's character building stuff. That's really character building stuff. So, love it.
Well, Charlie, this has been brilliant. Where can people learn more from you?
Well, they can jump on charliearnott.com.au, my website. We've got events there. We've got some biodynamic workshops happening here at Hanamino in a couple of weeks' time. We've got one in South Australia. We're hopefully getting to WA later in the year. We're in Queensland, New South Wales. It's all listed there. We've got accommodation here at the farm as well. As of in a couple of weeks' time, we'll be opening the doors to Little Plains, which is a big old Federation homestead that we want people to come and stay and explore and do some farm tours and eat our beautiful meat and other things. And I'm on Instagram and all those things. So, and I've got a webinar series coming up I think it's starting in July, 6 weeks. It's called Your Regenerative Journey. And I've got plucked out some of the 6 experts in different fields of regenerative farming and regenerative living over 6 weeks, one per week. And we'll have that online in a couple of weeks' time for people to book in. And so that's our next sort of step. And then there's some other projects we're working on. But get on the website there and check out what we're doing. The podcast, the Regenerative Journey podcast, of course.
I was going to mention that.
Yes, so that's starting again May. Season 7 starts again in May in a couple of weeks' time.
Very good, very, very good.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. I really enjoy doing it. I'm honoured that I could get to talk to people and hear their stories and sort of put that out in the world. So we've got some interesting ones coming up there in that season. Nicole Masters is one. Who else have I got there? Shanna Wan from Sober in the Country. So we're just not about farming, we're about regenerative living and regenerative health. So some good guests in season 7. That's probably it, Anthony. That's probably enough pumping up my own tyres for one night. But really enjoyed my chat with you guys. That's awesome. I'm glad we just didn't talk about meat and farming because I think there's so much more around it that actually puts health into context. And I think health is comes in so many different ways, and we can be healthy or not as a consequence of so many different things. So love your work, both of you, and looking forward to catching up with you both in person somewhere, sometime.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming on and just giving us your time. That's I'm sure you've got much better things to do. So I really appreciate you spending that with us.
Well, maybe much better as in spending time with my family. That's pretty important. But I do have a rack of lamb waiting for me in the kitchen.
Nice. Yeah.
Of our own lamb. So I'm looking forward to that.
Beautiful. All right. Thank you so much, Charlie.
See you guys. Awesome. Thanks for the chat.